yeah, that's probably a good place to stop. And then if you have any questions, or we can just chat about it.
How did you research the trauma side of it?
A bunch of stuff. So I spoke to professionals. So Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, the hospital there, became a centre of excellence for trauma as a result of that. So this was 1988. So a lot of trauma research, and PTSD was still
in its infancy.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of around the same time the first Gulf War. They're really starting to explore it then. So it's just starting out then. So I spoke to professionals there, read a lot of papers, that kind of stuff. I spoke to survivors. I spoke to the families of people who died on it, and read a lot. At the time of writing that, so as I say, that was 2016 that was originally published. I then subsequently did my PhD on it and read way more on trauma research and trauma treatment, which Nate, we were chatting about that earlier on. It's kind of fascinating subject, but so kind of hard to comprehend what the brain actually does when trauma comes along. So yeah, it was years of horrible reading and horrible conversations. And
is the new edition different from the original? Did you make any changes because of what you learned?
Yes and no. It's not massively changed. The biggest change is just fixing all the typos and bad sentences and stuff that went along. There's a couple of scenes that changed, and like vocabulary tweaks, things like that, as things have been updated. But it's set that the closest it comes to today is 2013. So kind of anything that trauma specialists have learned since then wouldn't be right to put in. So no, it's fundamentally the same. Most people, I don't think, would notice unless you're going through line by line. So,
sounds like nobody knew what to do. Wasn't there any training for situations like that? Or?
There was and there wasn't. So they had the rules, but so this was the infancy of PTSD study. It was also the infancy of health and safety. Like in Britain, most of the health and safety rules that exist now came as a result of this, kind of the inquiry and the things that fell out. So basically what happened with Piper Alpha is they were fixing one of the pumps. So they switched off one of the pumps, were fixing it, and then a shift changed, and they sort of packed things away, finished the shift. The new people came in and didn't know that this pump had been disabled, so switched it on and it blew up. It was very, very basic, really simple. But now there'd be written records and don't put signs everywhere and proper debriefs, and there was just none of that. There was basic safety routines of in the event of emergency, go here or go here. Like if you're on this part, go here. Not much beyond that. And certainly, like one of the main things was go to the helideck and we'd pick you up. Well, the helideck was on fire, so what do you do? And there was no alternative.
When did that American, I think it was an American doctor, come up with this incredibly simple checklist principle? That became adopted as now a general principle all over the world. So it's the reason why I had a leg operation in the hospital, and on the edge of the operating theatre, they said, "What's your name? Michael Cruz. And what are you here for?" To have my leg operated. Yeah. Which leg? I mean, and she's ticking these things off. And there was apparently an American doctor who came up with that idea. And it's the same principle that the Japanese used in the Meitetsu and all this stuff with the trains. Was that around when Piper Alpha happened? Was that something?
Yeah,
that's what I was wondering.
Certainly in Britain, there was nothing.
Yeah.
Before that, it all grew out of this moment. So I kind of a personal thing back home when people complain about health and safety going mad. I'm like, no.
Yeah, you come to Aberdeen,
You have to understand why we have health and safety, what it's like before that. So that's part of it.
Sorry, I was a couple of minutes late.
That's right.
What was your personal connection for picking this particular event? I mean, I know it's a big event, but was there a personal connection as well?
There was a bunch of things. So I grew up in Aberdeen. I was 8 years old when this happened. So I remember it, but I remember it the way a child remembers it. It was like big and scary. It was on TV, and it was before 24-hour news and stuff. So it was like every hour there'd be a news flash. Also, my mother was a nurse in intensive care, so she was working that night as people were helicoptered in. And then just anyone who is from the city or who around that time lived in the city at that time, you know somebody. It's a small town, Aberdeen. It's like 400,000 people, something like that. So everybody works in the oil industry or is connected to the oil industry, and everybody knew somebody who had in some way been involved. So you just sort of grew up with it around you. But nobody ever wrote about it. Nobody ever did anything about it. You know, these sort of big disasters like 9/11, those kind of things, culture takes them on, deals with them. You get books and movies and plays and things about these events, and there was never anything about Piper Alpha. So in 2015, when I was sort of planning what my next book would be, there was a discussion brought up about these things. It was like the start of the appropriation discussion of, is it okay to write these kind of stories and talk about other people's history? And there's 9/11 stories, there's all Vietnam films in Britain, there's, you know, Hillsborough and things like that get done. And I sort of said, why has nobody ever done Piper Alpha? Like, it's such a big event. And my publisher went, you should do it. And I was like, no, I shouldn't do it. Like, I wasn't there, it's not my story. But then that's kind of how it developed into this family story over the time. So.
Did you get any woke flowback from
No.
having one of the first characters, one of my characters being a woman, from written in the first person?
No, not from that. So I expect the whole time I was writing, I thought I was going to get pushback from, this isn't your story, you weren't on Piper Alpha, it was my brother, it was my husband, it was me, how fucking dare you? And I didn't get any of that. I got a lot of people coming up at events saying,
Thank you for writing.
yeah, and it's, oh, you got this right, or oh, this bit, you know, whatever it was. I never got any pushback for writing from the point of view of a woman, but I did get a little bit, so she's bisexual, and I got a little bit of that from a bisexual friend going, oh, you've done, this isn't quite right, it's like you've used a couple of stereotypes and things, which she then, so she's bisexual, and she said, you've got this wrong, and then another bisexual friend said, no, that's fine, like, yes, it's a stereotype, but that doesn't mean it's true, and then they had a fight, and I'm going, I'm staying out of this. So that's kind of all there is. Yeah, so far.
Well, that's been republished, maybe, who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. But I mean, there's always that chance, but, you know, this is my 7th book. Everything I found that people have pushed back on me on have been things that I had no expectations of it. I was like, this is going to be a problem and someone's unhappy over here. So, but that's fine. That's, you know, it's fine when that happens. That's how you learn, and that's how you can work out what you think about things, is in those discussions.
Yeah, just made me think, given that trauma is one of the central themes, I wonder, it's probably quite hard for somebody who lived through it to read, because you might trigger them to relive it. But I wonder if you got any feedback from anybody who went through it.
I did, yeah. I had people come up, and it's the single most terrifying moment of my life is after doing one of these events in Glasgow, a huge oil worker comes up to me afterwards. I was there.
Oh man.
He's gonna, and he was happy. It was like, you know, he said it was horrible to hear that and to read it, but thank you for doing it and keeping the memory alive, because as I said earlier, like it's one of those disasters that's massive, but it's sort of slipped away a bit in people's memory. So I think the main thing for people is to keep it alive. And the people who were either on Piper Alpha or had family members who died who have read it, their first concern, what they've said to me, their first concern is always, is this guy trying to make money out of this? Is he trying to exploit it? Firstly, there's never been any money.
That's
not been a problem. But also, it's that chapter I just read is the only part of the whole book that's on Piper Alpha. Everything is before and after. And there were 226 people on Piper Alpha. In my book, there are 227. So Marcus is an entirely invented character. He's not based on anyone who was there, because that would be, you know, I'm taking your father, I'm taking your brother, and putting words in their mouth and making them act in a way, and that I think would be beyond the pale.
Yeah.
So
That's clever to do that.
yeah, kind of had to. And there's a note at the back saying, "Look, I know this is factually inaccurate, but this is why I've done it that way."
How many survivors were there?
Those 226 and 167 sorry, 165 of them died, and another 2 from the rescue boat, and then one of the survivors later killed himself. So
Oh, really? From suicide?
yeah, there was one couldn't deal with the trauma. So, not a happy story.
Clearly a difficult topic to write. Why did you choose to do different time frames and not both linear?
Part of it was because I didn't want to write like a one night on Piper Alpha, everything is on there and just what's happening around. There are non-fiction books about it that cover all that and cover it much better than I ever could. So I knew I wanted to expand it out. And as it started expanding, it ended up covering like 33 years.
Right.
And like, unless you're Tolstoy or something, I'm not going to write 33 years from 1980. So that immediately means it has to be episodes.
Right.
And then I couldn't work out, like, I wanted it to be from her point of view, watching her family fall apart and watching her dad break down. But then she wouldn't have been there for the key parts where he experiences the trauma.
Right.
So it kind of had to. So as the story developed, it meant I need 2 characters, both narrating it, and then for it to have a journey, that you need the context before of how the family dynamics are.
Right.
Then you need the trauma and then breaking apart, and then are they going to get back together? Like how's it going to play out? How's it going to solve itself? But there's then not. I thought at the time there's not that much dramatic tension in that, of just will they, won't they heal their relationship. So then I started messing with the timelines and starting to do it more as it's like juxtaposed, so you see what the father's going through and what the daughter's going through at the same time. But they don't know what's happening to each other, but the reader's sort of aware, so you get this more of an overview. And it sort of developed like that. There was never a plan with both of them. So first we'll do 1980, then we'll do 1988, then we'll do.
That's what because it's 25 and then 1980. And I thought, how does one plan that? I don't know.
It develops organically. I think you'd go crazy if you sat down and tried to map that before writing anything. And it is linear, so it goes from past to present. It just does it in 4 parts. So
This is slightly off topic, but why? Do you have any theories why it didn't capture everyone's imagination? Something everyone talked about as why didn't that? Is it something British about shutting things up, or
there was no controversy about it? So the other disasters. So the same year, within the same 18 months of Piper Alpha, there was the Hillsborough football disaster, and there was the Lockerbie bombing.
Right. Okay.
And
that's the same year.
That's 88 to 89. It was a bad year. Scotland's a small country.
Yeah, right. That's incredible.
Hillsborough
My brother was born.
And the other one that was around then was the Dunblane shooting.
Jesus, that was
the school shooting.
Yeah,
It was a 2-year period. Yeah, but everyone was.
Is that when you decided to leave?
Well, everyone was looking at the Berlin Wall coming down and stuff like that, but in Scotland we're having our own little drama. There was no controversy about what happened in Piper Alpha. There was a Cullen inquiry, and they did a very, very good job going through all the details.
It was a really simple error, basically.
Yeah, we know this happened, and it shouldn't have happened, and it was negligence and it was incompetence, but nobody broke the law.
Yeah.
Nobody was at fault. The oil company never tried to cover it up. They didn't behave particularly well in terms of compensation and looking after people, but there was no conspiracy, there was no cover up. It was just like, this is what happened, we need to make sure it never happens again. Everything else that happened at that time, so Hillsborough had the cover up and
the Sun
conspiracy.
watched it.
Lockerbie had, who did research, and then right up to Al McGrahy being released again. So they sort of lived on in the court cases and in the arguments, whereas Piper Alpha,
conspiracy theories probably.
Exactly. Whereas Piper Alpha was sort of wrapped up and closed, and it was done. And there's the ripples, there's the trauma, but there was nobody arguing. And like a lot of people in Aberdeen, like when I said I was going to write this book, they said, what would you say? Yeah, like you can imagine writing a book about Hillsborough and what happened, and try and tease out the details and try and almost try the case and see how it goes. But you can't do that with this, which is why it becomes the family story rather than the Piper Alpha story. I think that's why. There might be other reasons, cultural, Aberdeen's small town, that nobody really thinks about that kind of thing.
Well, the rig was lost afterwards too, and I think that may have also meant that people don't have access to the pictures, because the pictures tell a story.
Yeah.
So if the news media can't get pictures, then of course it dies a faster death.
Yeah, I mean, there was the footage, because it burned for weeks and weeks, and
But
they
did it
got
for that long?
Red Adair.
Could you see it from the shore?
No, it was 120
Okay.
miles, so as far as I know, you can maybe that night when it was going up, you might be able to see a glow, but not that much. But they got Red Adair from he was a Texan firefighter. Who came out and he fought it, and that was on the news for a while. Like, that was the dramatic bit of all these big guys fighting fires on the water. But yeah, once it was done, it was sank and gone, and I think there's a boy floating there.
How about leaks? Was there oil leaks?
There must have been, but I assume it all burned. It was mostly gas that was coming through that pipeline, so it would have been switched off. I think the way the pipelines work, like they go through a few platforms, so it would have been switched off. But I would imagine it pretty much all burned away rather than lay there. Certainly, there was no reports I'm aware of, like oil washing up on the shore or anything.
So presumably many bodies were never recovered either. So.
Yeah. Well, they did. Once it was out, they went out. So I wrote the thing about the accommodation block, just a big box, went into the water with people still inside it, and they went down with submersibles and got it back. So they got the galley and they got the accommodation block back. And I read an account of one policeman as still the most horrific job I can ever imagine doing. If they get the accommodation block back onto land, and then they had to open up, go inside, and get everybody out, and it had been underwater for months and months by that point. And so some people were lost, but they got quite a lot of the remains back.
So a lot of people died just as you described there, just waiting. We're supposed to wait here, aren't we?
Yeah.
It was a much bigger disaster than anyone had anticipated, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was just unimaginable, really. I think maybe one or two people died in the actual event.
Most people
and
died.
Everybody else was just, they couldn't escape, couldn't get off. So just luck.
Did you, during your research, find anything about something called the Ocean Ranger?
I know the name.
It's off of Newfoundland.
Yeah.
There was an oil rig that went down in a storm with about 80, 90 workers. I don't know if that was ever researched as far as trauma went, but
When was that?
that was early 80s, I think, 81, 82.
Yeah.
And that was a storm.
Yeah. But it just brought to mind this.
There's a lot of them. There's about 2 years later. There was another one in the North Sea that went up, but it wasn't quite as bad.
What was it called?
Ocean Odyssey.
Okay.
Odyssey, I think. But yeah, I mean, working offshore is one of the most dangerous professions there is. So yeah.
Did that have any repercussions for future rigs being built in Scotland after that, or was there any political fallout or any?
I mean, there was all the health and safety stuff. Things got tightened and that kind of thing, and that company, I think, sort of moved out a bit. But yeah, I mean, still today, I don't think there's much being built now. The North Sea, they think the North Sea is sort of starting to dry up. Not in that it's actually drying up, but for the huge oil companies, there are better investments elsewhere. So it's getting smaller and smaller. But it didn't stop people working in the oil industry. It didn't stop the oil companies making money. So.
Yeah, the mate was a rig worker. He just got from time to time. He was a geologist. He used to go out from time to time. Work there. It was incredibly well paid and short term and back in there.
Yeah, my stepbrother does it. He's 30 and he's still doing it from Aberdeen. He's a geologist, so it's still the number one employment opportunity for people from Aberdeen. I'm one of the few that didn't go into the oil industry, but I still ended up writing about it.
Can I have another question? So I'm probably a lot of questions here, but because I thought this at the very beginning. I think I understand the meaning of the two titles. Why the change?
Couple of reasons. So, In the Shadow of the Piper Alpha was the first. It was the working title as I was writing it, and the original publisher was like, "Oh, it's too on the nose. It's too let's
Too many people know the name and they don't use that."
Let's be a bit. His kind of aesthetic was let's be a bit more arty about it, and let's like a very different cover as well. Let's.
Well, that's part of the reason I asked whether you could see it from the shore. Actually,
so from a marketing point of view, he's emphasising, this is a story about a woman, and let's
the guy
appeal
that
to.
went bankrupt.
Yeah. He went bankrupt for other reasons, but hang on.